So I'm going to talk to you the next 15 minutes about what I've been up to for the last 3 years or so, looking at Bechstein's roosts in trees. To start us off, a quick show of hands. Who undertakes surveys of trees for bats? I'm in the right place then, that's great. Remember who you are. I'm going to come back and ask you questions later. So I stood here at this very spot last year, and this is one of the slides that I put up when I was talking about how effective our surveys of trees when we look for bats are. That they're more likely to be empty than occupied. That means the bats that we're surveying are more likely to be elsewhere on the day that we look in that tree. This clearly has issues when we're trying to survey trees for bats. One of the criticisms of my data that this was based on was the fact that we found these roosts by just going out. We went out, found a tree that looked nice, we inspected it. If they found bats, that was great. If we thought it was suitable, we'd carry on inspecting it to see if bats turned up later. And we'd go out once a month for a period of at least a year. And the criticism was that we had lots of records of bats in trees, which is great, but they typically were small numbers of bats, normally one bat. And the suggestion was that perhaps, okay, well, maybe they're just a bit more transitory, a bit more nomadic when they're on their own. And that's a fair criticism. So I wanted to do something about this. So in 2017, we radio tracked to Bechstein's. And the main aim of that was to try and find some maternity roosts. So we caught a female Bechstein's bat in May, tracked where she went, and she went into 5 different tree roosts. This is the first one. So a woodpecker hole in oak. A peak count now of about 37 bats. This is the largest roost we found during the study. Number 2, again, another woodpecker hole, this time in ash. Smaller number of bats in this one. We jump over to number 4 now. There was a number 3. However, it was somewhere in a dead tree. We couldn't climb and establish exactly where it was. So we kind of had to bin that one, unfortunately. So number 4, a wound this time in ash, and a peak count almost up to the kind of maximum we had a minute ago of 33 bats. And then in ash again, a woodpecker hole with 19 bats in it this time. So what I wanted to do was to employ the same technique that we did before, go out and study these trees. So now we had some maternity roosts, something really meaty to get our kind of teeth into. So I used to run weekend sessions once a month where we go out, get a load of ecologists, get a load of arboriculturists, and we go out and we climb together. And the ecologists can teach the arbs about bats, which is great, and then the arbs can largely laugh at the ecologists at their poor climbing skills before showing them how to climb the tree properly. And so we went out once a month and we studied these trees. So we recorded various different things, but for the sake of today, we're going to look at 2 of them, okay? So by my maths, we had 4 trees, 12 visits, 48 chances to encounter bats. Anyone like to guess how many times we found bats out of those 48 times? 4? It's fairly pessimistic, come on. Any advance on 4? 5? God. We found them once. Now you're laughing, and I kind of get that. It is a bit funny. This is terrifying to me. Is it not? When we go out and survey for bats, these are maternity roosts, Annex 2 species, significant roost, yeah? High conservation significance. And the surveys we have are fairly ineffective. Really, really concerning. To cheer us up, here's the video of what we found. So woodpecker hole in ash, this one. This was tree number 5. You can see the hole being closed in slightly by a nuthatch as the original photo was taken. And here we are. A feature that only goes in and goes down. Bats below the entrance, I'll point out. Anyway, some lovely bats. So, okay. Bats aren't a great indicator. Maybe droppings would be better. So out of the 48 times, how many times do you think we found bat droppings in the trees? God, once? We've gone down. Surely we're likely to find bat droppings more often than bats. Yeah? So we had 1, 4. You're a difficult crowd. Normally people say, oh, it's at least half, and I can really shock them, but you're beyond shocking, clearly. We found them twice. And again, this is really quite worrying, right? I put this slide up last year in my talk. I talked about how droppings don't last long. They're useful if they're there, But first of all, they may not collect in the features that the bats are roosting in. In these ones, they probably would do because they're largely cavities and there's kind of space at the bottom for them to collect. Once they appear, they disappear very quickly because this is a natural environment. It's not like a loft void where it's fairly sterile, where the bat droppings land on the insulation or the floorboards and then just stay there. These are wet, dynamic environments with detritivores, decomposers in that break them down. So I think we can agree, the 2018 study was a bit of a failure in terms of trying to find bats and learn a bit more about them. It gave me a bit of an insight and kind of reaffirmed something that I thought was true already, that it's very, very difficult to find bats in trees. But some of the kind of reflecting on it and some of the reasons, perhaps, or two main reasons why it wasn't particularly effective is because the survey design didn't reflect our knowledge of the species. I took the approach that I'd always done. It was more kind of for enjoyment than anything else. We'd go out once a month and we'd go and climb bats in trees. According to the bat tree habitat key, there's no evidence that Bechstein's bats hibernate in trees. So actually, we were wasting some time in the winter. I enjoyed myself. It gave me something to do. The other people that came out enjoyed themselves. But in terms of kind of really focusing on these roosts, which were maternity roosts, we were wasting our time. And then the flip side of that, of course, is that during the key periods, the maternity period, we didn't have enough survey effort. For those of you who undertake surveys of trees for bats, do you have a copy of this? The answer should be yes. If not, there's a big pile downstairs on the pelagic publishing desk, I noticed. So the bat tree habitat key says that we need to split it into 6 sections. And we don't need to survey all trees in all 6 sections of the year. When you assess your tree, when you measure the metrics or the parameters of the feature, it will tell you where you need to focus your survey effort. But for us, we're going to look at these two. Of course, we're looking at maternity roosts. So let's kind of drill down into what that says in terms of survey effort. So the bat tree habitat key talks about if we want a 50% confidence, so more likely than not, of confirming whether bats are using that tree for a maternity purpose, we need to visit 14 times during the pregnancy period, consecutive days this is, and then 14 times in the nursery period. Who does that? No one? Anyone? We should be. This is evidence-based guidance. This now supersedes what it says in the Bat Conservation Trust's good practice guidelines, because this is based on evidence. This is what we should be aiming for. Difficulty is, how do we make a client pay for that? Really challenging, yeah. So the caveats talk about actually, for the 14 days, is only going to be needed for 3 species, Bechstein's, Barbastelle, and Alcathoe, because they're the rare ones. Everything else is then on a sliding scale. And it also says that your 14 consecutive visits are only kind of justified if there's no other way or easier way or more cost-effective way of collecting that data. During the study in 2018, I had various conversations with people about using trail cameras and see if we could utilize these to improve our surveys of trees. So I held on to it until we found our first roost, which was in July, and the bats were in there. That video I showed you a minute ago, I got very excited. I set the camera up outside the roost, came back the month later, really looking forward to what data we had on the camera. And as you can see there, it was kind of on a boom arm that was positioned below the hole. And on the first evening, it swung down. And I had lovely videos of the trunk below the hole, but no bats, which was fairly useless. On that visit where I collected it, we then had the droppings I mentioned earlier in one of the other tree roosts. So we moved it to that tree roost, and we then hung it from above this time to hopefully avoid that. And so that was on tree roost number 4 there. Bearing in mind for tree roost number 4, we never recorded bats on the 12 visits we made. I went back and collected the footage a month later, and we had this lovely bat performing for us and flying into the roost. This camera in 1 month was more effective than us visiting 12 times throughout the year. We then moved it onto tree roost number 1. If you remember tree roost number 1, we didn't have any bats in it during our 12 visits, and we never had droppings in it either. And the camera, again, moved slightly, so it wasn't positioned very well, but you could just about see the bat going in there. And this was positioned slightly differently. It faced on the hole. And if you slow that down, you can actually see that's a Bechstein's bat as well. So I got very excited by this. I bought another 3 cameras, 1 for each tree. And I was determined to prove how effective these things could be. And actually, I was really hoping that we could set them up at the beginning of the year and let them run, collect them in. And by September at the National Bat Conference, I could say, I know exactly what the bats have been doing when they've been going in and out, and get some really useful data. It's not been quite that fortunate, unfortunately. It's good, but not quite there yet. Next year, or certainly the year after, we'll crack it. Caveating myself now. This camera here, this is camera on tree roost number 3, and he looks friendly. Looks like he would be your friend, but he really was not. First of all, the SD card wasn't formatted correctly, so it went out for 3 months and didn't collect anything. Next, I put it back out and found out the internal battery had gone, and so it only turned on for 1 night instead of 3 months that I left it out for. However, on that 1 night, it recorded bats going back in that tree. So again, more effective than us going out 12 times the year before. And so whilst I've been plagued by technical difficulties with this, we've confirmed bats in tree roost number 1 with these cameras this year. We've confirmed bats in tree roost number 2 and number 4. We haven't yet confirmed them in 5 because the camera stopped recording on the 27th of March this year. And unfortunately, I didn't have the time to go and collect it in between then. It's a really horrible tree. I don't like climbing it. So I kind of just left it up and hoped for the best, which kind of came back to bite me slightly. But clearly, there's some merit in this. I was hoping that maybe we could kind of set them up and leave them out for the whole year and give some really good indication in terms of whether bats are using these features. And in my head, I had this image of things like maybe HS2, where they're like several year projects that the first year you could just litter the countryside with these things, and then following year, focus your survey effort down. I don't think we're quite there yet. However, if we're going out to climb trees to survey for bats, why not climb it, put it up on the first visit, collect it on your second survey? These things cost about 140 quid. With the batteries and SD cards, it's maybe 160 quid and the clamps and things. It's nothing. It takes an hour to have a look through the footage at the end of maybe the whole season. It's really quite quick. And this is much more effective than paying people to go out, climb a tree, or even go out to an emergence or a re-entry survey on a tree. So if we kind of then reflect back on what the battery habitat key says, this is a more cost-effective way of achieving this 14 days in a row. These cameras have been out since March with the same batteries, and they're still going now. These things last a long time, and you can put larger SD cards in as well. So they're capable of long-term recording if we can just kind of crack it and get it right. I've been playing around with the kind of the positioning of the cameras. So initially this year, they're all like the photo on the right there, which was side on. If that was the hole, the camera's facing that way. I was told that's your kind of best opportunity to catch bats because you've got that arc of them flying in and flying out, and it works. But you don't get the nice clarity of the bats. You get a kind of a very overexposed tree trunk, and it tends to focus in the distance rather than on the trunk itself. So I've been kind of playing around in this autumn, leading into next year, see what the kind of the most optimum angle is. So this one on the left, we've moved it round slightly to focus more on the hole. And I've positioned a few directly above as well, to see if we can get greater clarity from the videos. So, not as great as I hoped it would be in terms of the news, but it was really, really fascinating, really useful. So, try it. Buy one of these cameras, give it a go, see if it works. Feedback in. We can only improve if we all get together and work on these things. And technology will catch up. At the moment, they're not quick enough to catch bats leaving the roost. It's mainly when they return because the trigger time's too slow. But remember the times when we had a bat detector and a separate recording device and we had to kind of connect the two, and I thought, well, why the hell are these not in one piece? As soon as the demand is there for this equipment, industry will catch up with us. They will start producing it for us. So we need to start requesting this. Thank you very much.